Talking Illinois high school football.
If your goals are as high as you talk about, tonight's the night you go out and just take one more step.
It's a view from the West.
And it starts right now!
Welcome to View from the West podcast, brought to you by Breedlove Sporting Goods, part of the River Rivals Media Network, the podcast covering Illinois high school football on the western side of the state of Illinois. I'm your host, Greg Armstrong, joined by Mitch Stormer. Mitch, it's a bonus episode here. Some news, some rumblings around the state about some, possible realignments, some new proposals going to a ballot. We won't say the word districts. It's regions that are being discussed, but potential changes, a lot to talk about here. So, Mitch, you've been doing your homework today. Welcome in, and I appreciate your efforts to get us the knowledge we need.
I don't know if I'll be able to provide all of that, but, this isn't our first time that we've had to record a kind of a special, not breaking news, but just a special episode. I feel like this is anytime that there's anything that should provide a seismic change to how football is played in the state of Illinois, it kind of warrants an extended discussion. So glad to kind of spend most of my day learning about that and talking to a variety of people and continuing to do that tonight with you guys.
Yeah. Well, Mitch, you just referenced you guys, multiple people here. Mitch, you suggested this in a text this morning at about 6:15 a.m. and you followed it up with maybe Soucie ? So, of course, if we're talking about proposals and talking about the ins and outs and everything that is Illinois high school football, we had to bring in Steve Soucie from Friday Night Drive podcast and newspaper coverage, Shaw Local Media. So, Soucie, thanks for taking some time jumping in. A little bit of late notice, but I think this time of year, it's always late notice, I think. So,
yeah, a little bit. I just wanted to say before we get started here, I just set an alarm on my phone. I've got a hard out at 1 a.m. this time, guys. So no farther than that. Okay, let's cut it off there. All right. Those of you that don't know, we performed a mammoth one of these in our previous discussion. So I got a hard out at 1 a.m., guys.
All right. Well, and I was going to make the joke that, Mitch, the challenge is on because, Steve, in your Friday Night Drive podcast, you talked about this proposal and the IHSA brackets for this year all under like 40 minutes. So that is a tough challenge.
Yeah, it was unfortunately for anyone listening, it was just me babbling for a whole bunch of time, but I did manage to get it in there as concisely as I could. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. We'll get into it. But today, if we're talking about the landscape of IHSA football, if we're talking high school football in general, we got to thank our friends at Breedlove Sporting Goods, Western Illinois' premier sporting goods store for uniforms, apparel, equipment, awards, and online team stores. They provide all the same sporting goods services as the big nationwide companies, but with a faster turnaround, and their uniform pricing is probably a fraction of what you're used to. They offer name brands such as Adidas, Under Armour, and Nike, and are responsive with any inquiries. With a primary focus on the western side of the state of Illinois, Breedlove Sporting Goods is the fastest way to outfit your team. Check them out on Facebook or at breedlovesports.com. All right, so here we go. Let's get into the proposal that has been making the rounds today on social media and all over, Friday Night Drive's coverage. And Mitch, it starts in Roxana, Illinois, Roxana High School, and their athletic director, their coaches put together this proposal. You were able to get on the phone with them today and talk to them. So I'll let you kind of start with what did you learn, who'd you talk to, and what did you learn? And then we'll, bring in Soucie to kind of give us some of the fine details.
Yeah, so certainly this got released last night. Soucie, I believe that was your first release of your article, getting into the detail about this a little bit, and that was in hand with Roxana putting out their own dedicated website and some various documents that supported this proposal. And so, today was spent a lot talking to coaches, seeing, hey, have you seen this? What are your thoughts? And then it rolled into this afternoon. We had learned that Kyle with NUIC Football had gotten an invite to talk to Roxana. And then shortly after that, we got one as well. And I happened to be available. So I emailed back. I said, yeah, let's talk. And so I talked it was about an hour and 15 minutes to Mark Briggs, who is the Roxana AD. And Greg, you mentioned that it was the AD and the coaches that might have assembled this. I will take that a step further and say I think this goes at a higher level than that. I believe that this is fully within the Roxana administration. I think everyone's on board with this. And it from my conversations, this is a very much a team effort there from Roxana. So yeah, a good hour and 15-minute discussion, just learning the lay of the land of this. And it's one thing to look at the presentation material that they've provided, but I think it takes, and I think that's the point, to have the discussion, because there's going to be a lot of quick decision on this, like, oh, nope, I don't like it. But that's almost how I was until I had that deeper conversation with Roxana. And I think at a certain level, that's all they want. They want to have no quick jerk reaction to this. They want teams to really understand the material. And I think certainly if you compare it to the district proposal last time that this group here took 3 hours to discuss, this is the most transparent proposal I remember seeing, certainly about this particular issue. So I want to start by saying I credit Roxana for the transparency and their willingness to be an open door and being able to answer the questions that they hope are going to be asked.
Yeah. So I think I'll give a little bit of detail from what I know, from what I've read, and then Soucie, I'll let you jump in and kind of, correct me if I'm wrong or fill in the details. So essentially this would be expanding the playoffs, and I'll let you get into the numbers on how much it would expand, but we'd be looking at potentially 2 and 7 teams, 3 and 6 teams, certainly getting into a playoff field. So an expanded playoff field. It would be a 9-game regular season would remain, but the playoffs would be expanded because of the more teams, obviously. So you'd be cutting out the week 0 scrimmage, which we just got in place a year or two ago. And then as far as the regions are concerned, it would be obviously based on geographic location along with enrollment. But I think the creative part of this proposal is that they're not really stuck hard and fast in 1A teams have to go with 1A schools or 2A and 2A, that there is a little bit of wiggle room within there to make what I would say almost some common sense type decisions based on teams are at, where they're at, and where they're located along with their enrollment. So I guess from there, Souce, I'll let you take over and fill in the details and kind of where this proposal has come from and where it's at.
Well, I think to start with, full disclosure, this organization reached out to me very early in this process, and I had long conversations with them about. I asked them what they were hoping to accomplish. They asked me, "Hey, what do you think would be some of the pratfalls that we might fall into?" And part of what I suggested, and I'm not going to act like I modeled this for them because I did not. I made some suggestions that they followed. I made some suggestions that they didn't. One of the things that I suggested in this process was the flexibility that you just mentioned. I felt that if you're going to do this, if you're going to do regions or whatever you call them, you have to one, provide for some flexibility. You cannot go with a rigid, okay, there are 64 1A schools in Illinois. We're going to divide them into 18 districts as close as we can. Doesn't work. It's a nightmare. It's a train wreck. We saw it before. It's just does not work. So what I thought was 2 things that you needed to do. One, you need to make the districts smaller. You need to have 6 teams in those districts, and then allow for more non-district games. Everything has to count, which is what we're doing here, because I know one of the previous proposals had a game or 2 games that did not count towards playoff consideration. Everyone hated that. So you have to make sure that everything that you're doing, all those games count. So you're not changing the way that we put together the playoffs now. We're just expanding the playoffs. It's still the same thing, stacking on wins, stacking on playoff points. There's just more allowance for that. And then when it comes to the scheduling piece, what you're doing in that situation is you're creating smaller districts and I like the way that you put it, common sense decisions when warranted. And we're not talking about moving up 3 classes to make this work. The most you can move is up 1 or down 1. That's the most you can move. You can't move any other way, and that's why they're calling it a flex regional proposal. So, and I like what you said about it too, Mitch. And I told them this from the get-go, and they've followed through on that. I said, what you need to do is you need to come up with 1, you need to come up with a succinct mission statement about what you're doing. And 2, if somebody wants to dig into the guts of your proposal, you have to provide all of that information. If somebody wants to go in and say, how does this work? How does this work? It has to all be there. And I think based on what you're saying, you looked at it, it's all there, isn't it?
Yeah. And that and then some. I mean, if anyone who is listening to this has probably seen the links that they've shared, it's a full-blown website. And there are links to slideshows, and there are commonly asked questions, and it's all laid out. Like I said, this is the most transparent proposal I've seen, whereas the district one from last year, it frankly was just kind of nonsense because it didn't offer anything, any real answers to anything, where this is very well thought out. It's very well structured, and it allows for coaches or administrators or just member schools in general to get the answers that they're looking for. And again, as I mentioned, as you just mentioned, they are a phone call away. It was 1 email, and I had a phone call within a couple minutes. It's led to text messages ever since, and I don't anticipate that stopping for the next couple of weeks. So this is, again, as well laid out as I could possibly imagine it could be.
Yeah. Mitch, in talking to them today, what did you get the sense of? What did they see were? And I know a lot of people around the state have their opinions on what the problems are, but from their point of view, I want to know from what they thought coming into this. Why did they feel like they needed to make a proposal and make it as detailed and thorough as they have?
I think it's just they want that transparency. They're willing to take the bullets. they're willing, the first guy through the door always gets bloody. And I would imagine that they solicited input from various schools, and I don't really know the way that the proposal process works, but I imagine there can only be one. So they are the one that put their name on it. It is the Roxana logo on this website. It is the Roxana personnel that is the contact. So they're willing to be that go-to source for this information. One of the main things I wanted to understand is the why of this. And that's been, I think, the question that we've probably been hit with today the most. What's this for? Are we just changing to change? And I don't believe that that's true. And let me preface by saying that at any point in this conversation, I'm not advocating for this. There are parts of this I now understand better, and there are parts that I don't like. But again, I appreciate the willingness to have that discussion. But in essence, the goal here is not to expand playoffs. To my understanding of this, the goal here is to ease the burden of the regular season that has increasingly gotten more difficult, and with either teams moving conferences, whatever that is, it's a way that can maybe bring some stability to that. And yes, there are going to be a lot of detractors from having 2 and 7 teams in the playoffs, but you got to look at it from a different lens. And we've seen situations like this season, and teams or fans are asking, well, how would we change this? Well, here you go. Here is a way to do it. So I'm hesitant, or I would ask for people to be hesitant to be so quick to shut this down, because you can't have it both ways. You can't want something to change and then not be willing to look into how you would change it. But again, the main thing I wanted to understand when I talked to Mark Briggs was, why are we doing this? And it was a different answer than what I expected.
Yeah. Souce, go. tell me a little bit about, we've kind of addressed it, but tell me a little bit about the flex bands or the regions that are, how they would be drawn up and kind of how they could flex. As I read it today, I'll admit I'm more of somebody who can learn by seeing it or learn by hearing it. And as I was reading it, I kind of felt like Michael Scott saying, "Okay, explain this to me like I'm 5." Because it's a lot of fine detail, and I give him a ton of credit for that. But I guess if you can kind of break it down for us, how are the regions drawn up, and then how can they be flexed or manipulated just a little bit?
Well, basically what it comes down to, and I'll try to be succinct with this. I don't know if I'll succeed, but the first thing that you have to do is to do this the way that they're doing it is the public league is still going to be its own entity. So they're not included in the overall way that you're stacking this. So right from the get-go, you're removing about 56, 60 schools from the equation from how this is decided, how the regions are put together. And there are various reasons for why they do that. I actually support that. I think that that's the right thing to do, because I think if you do end up including them in the other districts, you're going to get some real district imbalance that comes into play. And the public league, I think, for whatever faults you think that they may have, their system currently does a pretty good job of, for the most part, sending their most qualified teams forward. The teams that actually have a little bit better chance of, but if you start sprinkling them into the other districts, you start to get into an issue where there's a lot. And that's what we came into when we had previous district/region proposals, is that you didn't really know what to do with them. So they're isolated to begin with. That leaves you with a little over 400 schools. If you don't include the that are 11-man playoff eligible schools right now. So basically what the principle was here is that you take those remaining schools, you divide that by 8, the 8 classes, and you get a breakdown of what schools by their enrollments should be in their particular classes. All right. So then for every one of those classes where you have those teams, I believe it ultimately ended up being groups of 56 teams, I think, if I remember correctly. All right. So what you do to establish where the flex regions are, you stack them in order of enrollment, and all multiplier waivers, playing up, all those things are still in play. Those are the same principles that we're currently using. You stack them in order of enrollment, and then inside of each of the classifications, this doesn't happen in 1 or 8A, but the first 25 schools in that group can be flexed to the class above them. So the first 25 schools enrollment-wise could potentially be flexed into a 1A region, all right? The bottom 25 schools can be flexed into the classification below them. So the largest 25 enrolled schools in Class 2A could potentially be flexed into 3. Now, and that goes all the way down. Same principle goes all the way down through all the classes. Now, how would a team be flexed? That's the next question. All right. You are looking at the map and you are saying to yourself, okay, there are 5 teams that fit well as a region together. And then on that map, you'll also have the list of available 2A schools, schools from the next classification that can be flexed into that one. And if there's one school that's just kind of sitting out there isolated by itself that would fit really well into that previous group of 5 teams, then you could flex it in and make a really sensible geographic grouping where the enrollment disparity is not large, because we're not talking about jumping up 2 or 3 classes here to make this happen. We're talking about 1. And the fact that the schools that can be flexed are close to the bubble anyway makes it even more sensible in regards to, okay, this is a 2A school, but to be honest, it's barely a 2A school. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. It's in the margin of error, if you would. So that is basically the principle of what they're doing there, and where this is different. And like I said, we brought up this a little bit before when we were talking about before. The districts or the regions are smaller, so you don't have to, start making weird grabs to make 8 teams, because sometimes in different areas of the state, there are really bad situations out there where you've got 2 outlier schools that are, 100 miles away from the other 6, but you have to have 8. So you have to make something work. So you're trying to shove a whole bunch of round pegs into square holes, and that's where you get into problems with the other ones. So smaller districts and the ability to have a little bit flexibility is what the overall goal of this practice is. Now, whether or not that succeeds, you have to really start looking at the maps to figure out whether or not that this is something that actually works in practice or is just good in theory.
Yeah. And it would go every 2 years. So you'd keep the same region every 2 years. Mitch, did you get the sense of, how much would they change every 2 years? I guess maybe that's something that we'd have to wait and see down the line, depending on enrollment shuffling and, things like that.
Right. Yeah, I think that would have to be a case-by-case basis. Now, the important thing that I learned in this is that when they are doing the regions, and let's start there too. One thing that when we talked last year on districts is, Soucie, you had your mock-up districts of what you thought they might look like, but nothing was ever released in that proposal. Roxana will be releasing their mock-up regions. They will be making that publicly available. It could be released as early as next week. They're going to roll it out 2 classes at a time, just to kind of ease that in. So I think that's important. Again, that goes back to the transparency, that it's going to be an initial mock-up that they are putting together. There's a lot of common sense that goes into it. Like you said, it's a lot of enrollment, or I'm sorry, it's really only based on enrollment and geography. And then what I learned too is that teams that have a multiplier applied to them right now, that doesn't change. They will be slotted as such. Now, if they have a multiplier and they have success, whatever it may be, and their multiplier would need to increase, that would still go into effect for the playoff. It would not mean that they would move in their region until the cycle reset. So even if their multiplier increases, they will still be in their cycle, they'll be in that region for that cycle, just for the region. The playoff remains a different thing. So I wanted to get clarity on that this afternoon. I also asked if you are a team that is flexing up, if you're a 3A team and your region is predominantly 4A teams, there's no way to really credit that. There's no, and this goes into, we'll talk about the out of region scheduling here, I'm sure in a minute. There's no basis for an RPI. There's no strength of schedule, metric that gets applied right now. So in theory, you could be playing up in your 5 or 6 regional games, and you might not have the greatest record doing that. It'll be close, like Soucie was talking about. We're not making far leaps and bounds here. They can still be competitive, but the expansion of the playoff then is what would allow a team that maybe did play up in a 4A regional, a 3A team playing in a 4A regional. Maybe they get through it at 3 and 6. Okay, well, you still got life, and you're going to be playing in a 3A playoff where you are going to be a pretty competitive team. So that was the biggest thing I had a question about, was how the multipliers were going to work, because we just went through that right after the state final. We just went through how all that works, and there's a little bit of that would change, but a little bit that would.
So, okay, just to make sure I clarify for myself and hopefully for the listeners too, I'm not the only one that has the question. So you could, based on your geography, say, hey, your better fit is in a 2A region, but you're a 1A school, so you'd end up in the 1A playoffs, but you play in a 2A region?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Now, do you need me to explain how that works?
I guess so, yeah.
Okay, so if you're in the way that the playoffs are going to be calculated is exactly the same way. So
Okay.
your record when it comes out, if you come out with a 5-4 record in the regular season and we go to determine the playoffs, you are simply put in at 5-4 with your current enrollment number. So if you went 5-4 in a 2A region, it does not matter. It's the same principle that we're using now. If you are a 5-4 4A team that played predominantly 6A teams during the regular season, doesn't matter. You go into the draw as a 4A team because that's what your enrollment number is. The region is only used as a guideline for those region games. Your non-region games, you can play whoever you want. But when it comes down to seeding and putting the playoffs together, it's the same exact practice. Did you go, if you went 4-5 with 42 playoff points, where does that 4-5 fit in the bracket that your enrollment says that you are? Doesn't matter if you played in a 2A region during the year. If you are a 1A team by enrollment that went 4-5 with 42 playoff points, you go in the bracket where the 1A 4-5 42 playoff points should go. So that's basically the nuts and bolts of it. So if you do end up being flexed up, you're essentially, for playoff consideration, you're flexed back down when you're being placed in the bracket. So that's really what it comes back down to.
And that's not really too far different than how it works now. I mean, take the track Mississippi. There's 6 teams and there's 3 classes. You're still essentially doing that now. So that wasn't a huge change in my view. It'd be different teams, but not a huge change.
No, you're right. And I guess, Mitch, when you explain it like that and when Soucie, you kind of break it down, that I think that makes sense, that just because we're saying regions or however you want to phrase it, it's still, they're all going to go into one pool and we divide it up, by the numbers for each class, to break up into each classification will come playoff time. So, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And the team that I brought this up with Mark was, and a team that we talk about, Greg, is Quincy.
Yep.
They are in the Western Big Six, and they are in an island of no other 7A teams. Not really. There's some, not many, down in their area. And the point of this proposal would to be that so they don't have to travel an hour and a half up to Moline, or 2 hours, whatever that road trip is, or those teams in closer to the Quad Cities don't have to travel to Quincy. This would put a team like Quincy with enrolled programs in closer to where they are. And that's what we're talking about. Yeah. Because there are teams that have to make long road trips. And I know that travel is a big thing with the IHSA, and that's why they always talk about 1 through 32 and how that can't be a thing. I don't agree with that. But from a conference perspective, I get it. I understand that because we have moved away from that in the 2 decades since I've played. You've seen it for whatever reason. You have seen these conferences, alignments change. Even take the track. Track used to be small school. Now it's more and more bigger schools trying to get in. So this is what is trying to alleviate that.
Yeah. Speaking of the Western Big Six, I did, we both, Mitch, I think, talked to coaches from around the Western Big Six today, and they talked a little bit about, I guess, first of all, one of the things I heard was the general consensus is they really want to see a mock-up first before they, really consider a vote. And I think that's across the board. It wasn't just Big Six coaches. It was about every coach said that. Souce, I'm guessing you're hearing the same thing on your end as well. What I did in terms of travel and kind of how things get sorted out, hearing from Western Big Six, mainly the teams in the Quad Cities area, I think that they're already used to traveling to Quincy. So I'm not going to speak for Quincy. I don't know what their thoughts are, but I would say in general, those schools in the Metro Quad Cities and in Quincy, the Quincy is used to making that trip. So maybe they could stay together depending on what else could lump in with them, potentially. But again, I would love to see the mock-ups. But I think I kind of want to pivot into, Souce, I'll ask you, in coaches you've talked to today or before it officially was released, when you kind of knew the backstory, what have you heard from coaches in your area, or maybe not up in the suburban area, but in the state of Illinois in general?
Well, I think the issue, at least on the first part of this, is that you have a lot of people that are very much in the staunch camp of don't add teams to the playoffs. All right. You also have a very staunch group of this isn't fair. That on the opposite side, how are we going to break through this stranglehold in this conference where I've got three powerhouses on the top that are always going to get into the playoffs, and the rest of us are all fighting for that one little playoff morsel at the bottom of the bowl. And there's a strong faction of that too. And that's why every time one of these playoff expansion policies come up, that it seems like we're almost split right down the middle. So then we end up going back to what we've always done because we can't get a consensus on what the right thing to do is here. So, I'll admit I'm on the sideline of I blanch a little bit when we start talking about expanding the playoffs. And I personally think that this is too many. Like, I think if you're starting to talk about, I just did a quick grab on last year's results at the end of the season to find out what it was. And there were 20 plus 2-win teams that get into the playoffs in this formula. So that I'm not real thrilled about that. I'll be completely honest with you. At that point, I'm almost like, and I don't like this either, just open it up. When we're that close to that line, that's kind of where I'm at. So that's the first step of it. And you get, and I knew before I even talked to anybody about this, I know the people that are in the camp of playoffs are fine the size that they are. And I know the camp of the people that are like, we should expand. We should provide more opportunities. So that hasn't changed. And I don't think anything is going to happen here. But the way we've got the second step of this, the scheduling piece of this, I think there's a lot more common ground in this discussion than there is in the expansion of the playoff situation. Because I know this as well as anybody does. Every year, I am getting more and more phone calls from people saying, I need a week such and such. I need somebody that we can compete with. I don't want to play these guys because I know that we can't compete with them. Whether or not that's true or not it's a debating article, but everyone's looking for someone good enough to compete with and give them a few playoff points, but not bad enough where we're going to beat them and they're going to give us no playoff points, and not too good that we can't compete with them. Or, it's this slippery slope where I have guys coming back to me over and over and over again in the spring and summer saying, I still need a week 2. What do you got? Like, the list hasn't changed. It's the same situation. It's the same 12 to 14 teams that are all dancing around one another because they don't want to play one another for various reasons. All right. So I think it's a many layered discussion because you get into the playoff expansion would pretty much eliminate that the scheduling dilemmas that people have, because you wouldn't be as stressed out scheduling a non-conference game that maybe you think going in, I'm probably not going to win this game. So that would take that equation out of the table and give you a lot more teams willing to open themselves up to playing some different games because they're not concerned about whether or not they're going to get to 5. And a lot of coaches will agree with me. If I can't get to 3 with whoever I'm playing, I don't deserve to go. Like, no matter how hard my schedule is, if I can't get 3 wins in it, I probably shouldn't be in the playoffs anyway. So that, so it's kind of a two-tiered argument. It's like some people are like, yeah, I kind of like that, and I think that would help us schedule-wise, but I don't know if I want to do it if that means that the playoffs are expanded. Well, it's kind of trying to butter your bread on both sides, because in order to fix the not needing the drive to 5, the only way you're going to fix that is by expanding the playoffs. You can't do it. You can't do one part and not the other if that's your concern.
Yep. Mitch, I want to jump in real quick and let our listeners know that today, between both of us, we've talked to coaches from the Western Big Six, from the Three Rivers, from the LLC. I know we talked to Kyle Kampmeyer and heard some thoughts from the NUIC and from the Big Northern. So we have a cross section of coaches and people interested in football from around our area. So I wanted to get a sense of kind of what the thought process was from, you know, the wide array of schools we cover, from big schools to small schools and across, you know, this western portion of the state. And I think that a lot of what I heard, and I'll let you jump in and kind of fill in what you heard as well. I think a lot of what I heard was people were interested in the regions and kind of interested in kind of formatting the scheduling a little bit, because they admit it's gotten a little bit out of control. And certainly some teams like you talked about that are more on those islands, some of those schools that we talked to, they kind of reference that. I heard a little bit of feedback on not liking the elimination of week 0, and we can talk a little bit about that in a second here. And then the big thing was not many people that I talked to really thought expanding the playoffs was a good idea. I think maybe some of them would go along with it if it was a byproduct to a better scheduling system. Right. But in most part, they didn't like the idea. I'll let you jump in and kind of what did you hear and follow up on that?
I heard the same. And I had told that to Mark. I said, that's been the sentiment that we've gotten. Everyone is kind of on board with the idea, at least, of more regional scheduling, but they were not at all. I didn't talk to one coach who was like, yeah, let's go ahead and expand the playoff by a bunch of teams. But like you just said, that's a consideration. If that's the trade-off, you got to at least consider that. And important too that, you know, we wouldn't be getting 9-0 teams against 2-7 in the first round. You know, those higher seeds would get buys. Now, they also don't like that because momentum's a real thing. And to give a top seed a week off could be detrimental. I think there is worry about that. So, no, I heard the exact same things. And I wanted to ask Souce, you had mentioned that of teams that you've talked to who have been advocates for expanding the playoffs. You know, of course, we're getting the comments of, well, we're letting everybody in and let's just hand out participation trophies. What is the reasoning that those schools are giving that they want to expand the playoffs?
Well, I think a lot of them are these schools that are participating in schedules that maybe already have, 2 or 3 teams in their schedules that every year are playoff bound quarterfinal type teams. So let's be honest about it. Like, let's talk about a locked conference, for example, that has all 10 of their games or all 9 of their games scheduled with the other 9 teams in their conference. And if you're one of those teams that typically finds itself in the middle of the league and it's got 3 top dogs at the top of the conference, where if you're being realistic with yourself, you're not going to beat any of those teams. You're not. So you're walking into the rest of your season saying, okay, I've got 6 games left. And in order for me to meet the playoff standard, I've got to go 5-1 in those other 6 games. Every year when I'm walking into the situation, in order for me to do that, I've got to go 5-1 in those 6 games that I'm in, the other 6 games, because I'm not winning the other 3. So for me to go 5-4 and get in the playoffs, I got to go 5-1 in those other 6. And those other 6 games you might be right on the same competitive edge with some of them. You might be a little better than a few of the teams maybe at the bottom of the league on a yearly basis. But the frustration stems from being a team that you're good, you're okay, you're average, you're in the middle of the pack, but you're already, before the season even starts, you're pretty much behind the 8 ball and whether or not you're going to get into the playoffs. And that's kind of me synopsizing the general argument of those teams. Because like the Blue Bloods, the teams that are in the playoffs every year, they don't want any change. This system is working for them. It's fine. They're not going to, and if they don't get into playoffs one year, they kind of look at it as, well, it's our own fault. I mean, it was just a bad year or whatever. But for these programs that I think, and if you look at it, and I mean, I've got all this in my nerd graphs. I have all these things where there are programs out there where you look at them, they're right on that line. They're a little bit over it, they're a little bit under it, and it's just this perpetual motion machine of just kind of going back and forth, over the line, under the line, over the line, under the line. And it's a product of having a schedule that is kind of, I don't want to say it's set up for them to fail, but in a way, it almost kind of is. Like you look at it, and that's why we get this even the teams that aren't in lock conferences. That's why I have the same 15 or 20 schools that call me every year saying, I've got a non-con in week 2. You know what we're looking for. And I do. I know what they're looking for. Yeah, I mean, but there are a bunch of other teams out there that are looking for the same thing. They're all looking for teams that, okay, I got to get a win here, but I don't want them to be too bad. So then it becomes this delicate little dance. And like I said, I'm not an advocate for expanding the playoffs. I'm really not. But if you do expand the playoffs, those conversations, in my opinion, pretty much stop. And I think I think we end up having almost an open door policy to bringing back some of these games, some of these rivalry games that don't get played now because schools are like, I can't play them because I'm more concerned. My biggest concern is making sure that I at least get to 5 and get in. I cannot play a team that I feel like, even though it might be a great game and there might be 8,000 people there watching it, I can't play it because I'm not confident I can win it. And that's where like I said, I think expanded playoffs, as much as I personally wouldn't like them for various reasons, I think it would end these, in my opinion, obnoxious conversations that we have about, well, can't play them. And there are some of these rivalry games that have disappeared because of this practice.
Yeah. Well, one of the conferences that I think is interesting in this conversation is the Northwest Upstate Illini, because they're a conference that I think in general, I bet they would say they're pretty happy with the current structure because they're like-size enrollments. They're all in the same pretty close geographic area. They've had some shifting over the years. Some schools go to 8-man and some conference shifting a little bit with Morrison and Fulton coming in, but they're a pretty good geographic and enrollment fit. But on the opposite side of things, I think the Northwest Upstate Illini could also benefit from, hey, here's a 4-5 Galena team. Here's a 4-5 Stockton or Forreston team over the last few years that you see missed the playoffs now. But man, if they were in that 1A field, I think they'd be dangerous to a lot of teams around the state because the competition level's that high. So I want to learn more about their coaches' thoughts because I think they kind of fall somewhere in the middle. What do you think, Mitch?
I mean, certainly that was the first conference that I thought of because it's top of mind on our coverage. But yeah, we talk about it a lot. A 4-5 NUIC team that doesn't get into the playoffs would probably fare pretty well, or at least we would like to see how it would stack up. Going back to what Soucie was talking about with the scheduling, I think it's important to note that in this proposal, in a 6-team regional, okay, you would have weeks 1 through 3 are your self-scheduled out of region or non-regional games. Your weeks 4 through 8 are your 5 regional games. Then week 9 is another self-scheduled regional game. What that does is everyone's on a level playing field in terms of your open weeks, right? It's hard to fill a week 5 open week right now because everyone is in the midst of their conference games or whatever it may be. This model would alleviate that a little bit. I think it'd be a little bit of chaos because everyone is trying to fill the same weeks. I would think certain matchups are going to take a little while, or you might get stuck with a team that you don't want to play. But as we've talked about, expanding the playoffs, it's not going to matter that much. If you go and get beat up, or if you beat up on someone else that's maybe not as highly ranked or whatever it may be, you're not going to get playoff points out of it, but the record offsets that. But I thought that was interesting, that it is structured in a way that everyone has the same open weeks. I could also see that being schools going into, I don't want to say agreements or contracts with other schools, but they will preserve whatever games they want to if they're not already regional games, and they'll have those games every year if they want to schedule that way. So I thought that was an interesting note that everyone would be in the same boat.
Yeah. Kind of pivoting to one more point on this proposal, I don't know. I guess it doesn't matter to me. I'm not a high school football coach, but I don't know that I love the idea of expanding the season by a week and kind of cutting your summer a little bit short, cutting your preseason a little bit short. I think there is, and in talking to some coaches, I think there is some value in that week 0, especially if it's a scrimmage against another school. You can kind of like work out some of the kinks and get some of the wrinkles ironed out in that first week or that week 0 before you get into the, the regular season. And just in general,
it's another week into the hot summer. One coach was saying, they're very strict on the wet bulb, the globe temperature.
Yeah.
And you're going 1 week, closer into the summer, and now you're dealing with hot weather, and you may not even get to practice. Just again, as the week 0 thing was a big point that I noticed too. But the other thing was, if you go more into summer, it's going to be a little hotter, and it's just one more detail you might have to deal with.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting in the next week or so when these mock-ups do come out, to kind of follow up with some of our coaches from our area and have been hearing from around the state, I'm sure, to see kind of what they think once they see something ironed out. I guess, Souce, we're still under an hour here, but as we kind of slowly wrap this up, what are your overall thoughts? What are the, the pros, the cons? I guess give me your kind of, overall takeaways as we kind of move forward here before we hit these mock-ups.
When we come down to, just kind of generally knowing what, like, and I've seen the guts of this, I've seen how it has been developed, and I echo the statements of this is by far the most thorough and well thought out take at this. And you might not agree with all the levels to it, but I think eventually something's going to happen here. Like, I don't think we're going to keep this system for perpetual eternity. It may not be this option. But I think everyone has to kind of keep in mind I think I don't know if it's reached a loggerhead yet. We're getting really close. Like if we pass on this and move on to, whatever the next suggestion is or something like that, I think people have to fully recognize that eventually this is going to change. We are not going to stay this way for perpetual eternity. We're not. Even though I'll strongly advocate. I like the system. But I recognize that the problems keep growing. It may not be a thunderclap yet, but the storm is rumbling. And if we keep having these, inflexible people are like, I don't want to do this, and I don't want to do this, and I don't want to do this, and I don't want to do this, the whole powder keg is going to collapse one of these days. It really is. I mean, I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to be the boy who cries wolf here, but it's really starting to be more and more of a problem. This was a problem 5 years ago. It's a bigger problem now than it was 5 years ago, and it continues to grow. I mean, I've become the de facto state scheduling matchmaker, and I know that there have been a lot. I spent a lot more time on it over the last couple of years. I don't mind. I like talking to coaches and I like trying to help. It's not like it's burdensome to me, but the amount of time that I've spent, helping teams find off dates and trying to pair them with like opponents and people that I think it's a decent matchup for both sides. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating to me, and I don't have any skin in the game. I can't even imagine how frustrating it is for people that are out there trying to find games and just feeling like they have no outlets. Like, this system, like it or not, will fix a lot of problems. Is it going to fix every problem? No, it's not. Nothing is. But if given a chance and given a fair evaluation period, I think people, if they're honest about it, can find a lot of good in it. They might not find enough to say, hey, this is what I want to do, but people that are dismissing it out of hand without really taking a look at it and what its intent is, I think are being short-sighted and mistaken.
Yeah, and that was one of the biggest things that I took away from my discussion with Roxana today was, and I think I said it, they just want you to look at it. They want you to read it. They want you to ask the questions and not just have an answer made up in your mind right away. Maybe you get to the same place, but look at it. Roxana has given the information that everything that you would need. They have provided it. They are simply asking to have the conversation. like you said, Seuss, would it fix everything? No, because we're going to still be dealing with teams that can't field an 11-man team a season. You're still going to run into a program that has an illness run through randomly on a week and they have to cancel a game. There is no solution to that. None. But again, I'd ask that question too. In that situation, would teams be able to add another out-of-region game? And the answer was yes. It might be a little harder because teams are playing their regional games potentially in those weeks, but that process would still be the same in that event. But we'll never, ever be able to have a system that accounts for things like that. And it's only going to continue to we're only going to see more co-op teams. We're only going to see more teams drop out of 11-man. The field is going to be reduced one way or another. Teams with losing records are going to be getting in. Your mock-ups have teams getting in now at 4-5 records.
Yeah.
That ball is already rolling. And so again, is it a willingness to change, or is it an unwillingness to do what it takes to change? I don't know, but I think that is where we're at. And just to have the conversation, look at it. Here's a proposal. Look at it. Read it.
Yeah. I think what's interesting in all of this talk was I heard multiple coaches say, I'm much more concerned with going 1 through 32 bracketing on the small level than I am with I'd go with the proposal if we add 1 through 32 on it, or whatever it would be, 1 through whatever, however many schools you let in. So I did think that was interesting that there are still some teams that say, we'll go with this if we get what we've been wanting for several years. So
and unfortunately that goes against the crux of this, which is to reduce travel, which I understand in the regular season. I will never be on board with that for playoff games. Never.
No,
communities will travel. I think that's the way it is.
Yeah, I think schools are willing to travel in the postseason.
This was one of the suggestions that I made that they ignored.
See?
This would be one of the suggestions that they did not take upon. I immediately said, can we seed them 1 to 48?
Well, God bless you, sir. You're keeping that, keeping that flame alive. Yep. But no, I think to wrap this up,
Susan, well,
go ahead.
I had a quick question because I did ask this to Mark at Roxana. I don't know what the results of this will be, but Seuss, would you think that if there was a proposal that included regional scheduling, this format, but excluded playoff expansion, do you think that would have more support? Or is it possible? Would that model be possible?
I think that model would be possible to suggest, but like I said, I don't know if that fixes the reason why you want to do regional scheduling, because without the the expanded playoff chip in the equation, if you're in a geographic region where you are having difficulty competing now without the expanded playoffs, it doesn't really help you. Like, you're still going to go back into those non-region games and do that dance of, okay, I'm in a pretty tough region. I might be lucky to go 2-3, 3-2. So I got to make sure that those non-region games are I got to get 3 wins in my non-region games. So then you start going through the whole dance again. So we're fixing a little bit of the problem. We're not fixing the whole problem. Like, that's the thing. It's like, I think this would help. It would ease the likelihood of you being locked into a region where, like I talked about before, where you're already behind the 8 ball because you've got 3 powerhouses above you that you're not going to beat. But without that expanded playoff chip, I think you still have the dance. You just have maybe a few more games to throw into that hopper in terms of, like, now you may be scheduling 2 non-conference games and you're doing this dance. Well, this system has you scheduling 4. So now you're doing a whole different type of dance, which is like, well, maybe I can schedule up once, but that's all I can do. I got to go 3 other times. I got to go get somebody I know I can beat. And then I'm not sure that I think that might actually make it worse, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah. I just can't wait to get to the mock-up here to kind of see where our teams fall, where the teams around the state fall, really, because I think then that starts a whole nother wave of conversation. And Suze, getting back to your point earlier, I spoke to a head coach who I think summed it up pretty well by saying that he didn't necessarily want change. He likes what we have right now, but he said we're one team away from our conference falling apart. And that I think that statement applies to almost any coach in any conference, anywhere around the state, that it doesn't matter where you're at. That's the same sentiment from everybody. We like what we have, but if this happens, we could be falling apart again. So to your
point,
point,
I said, that's only going to get worse. That's only going to get worse. It's only going to keep happening.
Yep. And I think that we have to kind of keep control.
You know, there have been conferences up here in Chicagoland, up in this area, where one team pulled the pin, and then it caused a domino effect of, these two teams are going over here, these two teams are going over here, and it took me a day sitting down with my little whiteboard and going, okay, this is where these guys are, this is where, and who gets left out in this situation. And then, and another one of those conferences that just formed 2 years ago is blowing up after this season. And I don't know how all the dominoes are going to fall after the fact. I still don't know, even though now that a lot of this is kind of all hanging in the balance, because one of the pieces here are, this proposal, and I think anything else that comes up is attempting to, if it gets passed and put into action, to be put into play for next season. So that is one of those things where it's like, all this discussion that we're having about the 2026 season and all these schedules that have been made up, if this passes, all those can be put in the trash can, because they're not going to be of any validity whatsoever.
So I guess that was going to be my next question, is what's the timetable here for voting, and then when would this be implemented? Tell us kind of next steps.
Well, the first thing is that this proposal has to go through the legislative committee. In terms of it making sure that it abides by everything that are in current IHSA bylaws. They aren't asking for any sort of amendments to bylaws. There is a little quirk in this policy that asks for an adjustment to the IHSA calendar to allow for an earlier start to the season so they can get more acclimatization days. Originally, if you use the old schedule, they were only going to get 9. So that would be 9 days from opening day of practice to first game, which seems very thin. This proposal is asking for a midweek adjustment into the previous week to give you 12. All right. So that's a little bit closer to falling into the general parameters of what everyone else does in this situation. But if you drop it to 9, it isn't. It would be one of those things where I think it might have been veto stamped by the legislative committee as being not enough acclimatization time from opening day of practice to first game. So that's the first step. And if it gets through the legislative ballot, it will be put on a general ballot to decide whether or not they want to put it on the actual ballot. All right. There are probably 15 to 20 things that are put out there on a yearly basis. That will be coming relatively soon. Then there will be that will go through the process of the legislative committee deciding which of any of those proposals get to go forward to the all schools ballot, where it's a simple majority. Yes, no. You can abstain if you want, but it won't count towards the general vote area. And everyone who participates, you are not required to vote on these topics. And some schools, even though they have football programs, do not vote. So if it goes through by a simple majority, more yeses than nos, then basically the steps would be made to put this practice into fruition in the 2026 season. To my understanding, if it were to pass through, there would be a committee formed that would sit down with the maps in coordination with the Illinois High School Association to come up with the official districts. And that would be a cross section of people from across the state and across school enrollments. There would be some small representation. There would be some mid-school representation. There would be some large school representation. There would also be some factors of people that are outside of that school imprint as well. There would be some members of the media that would be included in this as well. And they would be, a part of helping maybe move some of the personal bias out of the situation where, like I was saying before, I don't have any skin in the game here. It allows me to kind of look at it and say, okay, how is this good for everybody instead of how is this good for my particular school? So I think that's an inventive way to look at this. This is something that I don't know if has ever been done before in regards to trying to bring in some outside parties that say, hey, this looks like common sense to me. I know you guys are saying for whatever reason that you have, it's not, but what are we trying to do here? So that would be done in January or February, with the final regions being released probably late February, early March. That's the calendar that they're looking at. And then the scramble would begin for filling your non-region dates, because you can't do it beforehand because you don't know who's in your region. So it's not like you can sit down and say, okay, I'm going to play these guys and talk about it over the holidays or whatever and try to figure it out. You can't do that because you don't have your regions. But the added bonus to this, it's a 2-year system. So once you did that, you could potentially wipe out all your scheduling problems for 2 years until you got new districts or regions. I shouldn't say districts. They don't want me to say this.
Yeah. No, I think that's a bad buzzword. Yep.
So one thing that I've talked about today with some folks and has been presented in this proposal is there seems to be some data that would back up that member schools want this. And maybe it's a concern that it's a silent majority. When you talk about who's voting on this, we're not talking about, let me rephrase. Let me ask a question, I guess. There is probably discussions at every member school, and there could be a disconnect between what a coach wants and what a member of the administration wants.
Yes.
Do you have any insight into that process as to how these member schools come to the vote that they're going to submit?
I have had conversations with schools where a coach, or even in some cases an administrator, has reached out to me and said, hey, can you have a conversation with such and such and explain to them why this is beneficial for us, why we should want to do this? And I've had those conversations. So I understand the machinations that go into play. And the one thing that you have to realize, and I think you kind of touched on it right there, is there's only one vote per school. And the person who's listed on the IHSA as the school representative pulls that lever, all right, punches that button, whatever it is, however they vote it. I think it's an online service, to be completely honest with you. But, that person does it, and they might not be at all aligned with what the football coach is telling you about it. They may vote the exact opposite of what, if you're talking to the football coach about what they want, and they can tell you, I am 100% on board with this. This is what I want. And then when the vote comes, that coach either can't talk their administrator into going along with them, or their administrator is like, no, you're wrong. We're doing it this way. And they vote the other way. So sometimes you can get all this feedback that says, hey, we're behind this, we're behind this, we're behind this, we want to do this. And then when the polling place closes, the vote goes an entirely different way from the same people that are telling you, I support this, I want this, but then the actual school vote goes in the opposite direction. So that's where you get a lot of almost misinformation that goes on into the situation, because you're not always going to have everyone in each individual school on the same page. And then you're also going to have some conferences do this. They decide as a group what they're going to do, even if it maybe isn't in all agreement with all members of that conference. So sometimes you can have a voting block of 16, 20 teams that go in all together on one side of an issue, even though it's only really in the best interest of a simple majority of those schools. That's just kind of the way that they've agreed to do it. I know that happens too. So that's why, That's why when we talk about some of this, like some schools don't vote. There's always that thing with the Chicago Public League. They have a big voting block. How do they vote on this? If they all elect to vote and all go the same way on some sort of a policy, then they have the potential as a block vote to kind of steer whatever way this goes. If it's a close situation and they're on one side of the ledger or the other, if they all get together and say, "Hey, this is what we think is best for us," they could sway the whole conversation.
So Chicago Public League schools will vote even if they're not in the proposal or not in the region system. Yeah.
Yes, because they're still involved. They still have teams. They will still qualify for the playoffs.
They would be more involved in the. You would see more CPL teams in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, just like everything else. I mean, because now where they have, they do have some qualifying restrictions that I don't know if they would still hold on to in this formula. But, the schools in their upper echelon conferences that don't reach 5 and 4 now, they would get in just like everybody else at 4 and 5, 3 and 6, potentially 2 and 7. Those teams would still get into the draw. It'd be the same situation. You're still pulling from their pool of teams to fill your playoff fields. So they get a vote in this situation, even though the district or the region scheduling piece is not applicable to them.
We talked about it on the last proposal go around. Do you get the sense, or do you know, is the Chicago Public League schools unanimous that they don't want to be included in a potential alignment across the state? Or are there some schools that say, yeah, let's throw us in there, and others that want to remain separate? Do you get the sense either way?
I think there's a very, very small group of schools that would be open to being put into the districts, and they are the schools that I actually think are viable come playoff time. They would be okay with that. They would we want to challenge ourselves. You see it in their non-conference schedules. I'll give you a couple examples. Morgan Park and Kenwood don't duck anybody. I mean Morgan Park played Downers Grove, now north in the non-conference. Kenwood played Wheaton St. Francis. They're not. They look for those challenges. I think they would be completely open with being placed in this system. But the majority of the public league schools, I think that they're smart enough to realize that is where their competitive level is, and getting a playoff berth and get to experience that is the cherry on the sundae for them. They realize that their level of competition, because you can go back and look at the data. I'm not telling on anybody here. Most public league teams usually get pretty well dismantled in the open playoff system. So for them, putting them in a situation where they would have to play those schools that they can't compete with in the playoffs on a regular basis would not be good for those programs. And I think on a longer period of time would be a death knell for some of those programs. Some of those programs would be like, I'm not going to go get my head beat in for 8 weeks of the regular season, over and over and over again. I've had enough. I got to at least have a couple of games a year that I can play in.
Yep. Mitch, you got anything else for Soucie on the proposed realignment here?
Maybe not on that specifically, but we have heard rumblings that there is also a proposal that was submitted that does not introduce a region format, but does expand the playoff. In that event, that proposal gets submitted and Roxana's gets submitted, you talked about how the legislative committee will look at proposals and determine if, how things move forward. Would they ever put two like-minded proposals on the same ballot, or how would they make that distinction?
I can't imagine that they would do that, simply for the reason of, okay, we send them both through legislative and put them both on the ballot. What if they both pass?
Yeah. Okay. So how do they determine which one to move forward?
I think that comes down to them deciding which one they think best meets the needs of the circumstance, to be completely honest with you. I think that's what it really comes down to. It wouldn't shock me if they maybe went to Roxana and said, what if you just take this piece of it? Like, what if you say, hey,
And
they could go back to them and
the
ask them
legislative committee can do that.
if they wanted to, if they asked them, say, take expanded playoffs out of it. We want you to just put this up, all right? And then the other proposal, and I will verify that's true. I got it in my email today. There is a proposal that has just the expansion of the playoffs, keeping everything else the same, moving the calendar back 1 week to accommodate for the extra week of playoffs. That is a proposal that is also on the table. Like I said, I got my copy of that this afternoon, so I know it exists.
Yeah, and one thing that we didn't talk about really, and that comes into play more so on that other one, is the adherence to the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee.
Yep.
The SMAC in short. So if there is ever a proposal that goes against those guidelines, I don't know how far those get, but that does play a factor into these proposals as well.
Yeah, that proposal only has a 9-day period. That is written into the proposal. It is only 9 days, and I'm skeptical of that getting through the legislative process. But I also know that, like, there's a possibility that they could go to Roxana and say, take the expanded playoff element out of this proposal and submit it as this. Would you be interested in still doing that? I know that's a possibility. They could say, no, we want it to stand as it is. And then the legislative committee would make its next move based on that information. But they might offer them that caveat saying, hey, we'd like to run this up the flagpole with the flex regional proposal, but without the playoff expansion. And it's also entirely possible that they could get them to break it apart, and maybe they put the flex regional situation through and the expanded playoffs in separate proposals and say, you can vote on these. If one passes, so be it. If the other one passes, so be it. And we'll apply both of them. I mean, that they could possibly do that too. That's an option that's available as well. Because like what we're hearing, like all of us are hearing today, I like this piece, I don't like this piece. Well, okay. So I mean that's I don't know if that's something that is being discussed. I just know that it's a possibility.
Yeah.
That's the interesting part, is at what level or at what stage the IHSA steps in and doesn't they don't try and push for a proposal, but they can make suggestions on how they think can make it better. And I think that is interesting, that they're going to allow their member schools to propose changes, and the IHSA won't back one, but they might give you a suggestion on how to make it better.
Yeah, and the thing that I found really interesting about this whole process with coming through this is, we formed the ad hoc committee a couple of years ago, where we had these people sitting around in the room, and I was led to believe at last year's state finals, by talking to a lot of people, that there was going to be some sort of proposal brought forth by the ad hoc committee that was going to basically, for the first time, kind of have IHSA backing behind it, saying, hey, this is what the group thinks is the best, possible situation moving forward. This is what we think is the best choice here. Well, around the summertime this year, I found out there would be no proposal coming from the ad hoc committee. They could not come to a consensus on what they wanted to do. And that was kind of when I started to hear a little bit, and actually got contacted from the Roxana people, and they started to say, okay, we're not getting anything from the ad hoc. We recognize that we feel like something needs to be changed here. We're not getting any guidance from them. Do you have any thoughts on like what we should be trying to do here? What do you think? And I wasn't the only one that they talked to. They had Zoom meetings where they invited coaches to come in and offer their opinions, administrators. I've been in some of those Zoom meetings in the process, listening to what people had to say. They gave people ample opportunity to, and I've gotten some feedback from some people, well, I didn't hear anything. Well, maybe you specifically didn't hear anything, but I think you probably got this impression today. Mark is a pretty thorough dude. When he said that he reached out to everybody athletic director, he sent out to I think every athletic director that he had an email address to. He didn't reach all the coaches, but I think he made at least a valiant effort to at least touch base with just about everybody he could. Now, maybe they didn't see it. Maybe it didn't get to them specifically, but I think as far as making an effort and trying, I don't think that's one thing you can't do. You can't say that Roxana didn't make as ample effort to try to include as many voices in hearing what they had to say, and whether or not, maybe they didn't use all of it, but I've seen almost all of this material. We could put a binder book together that would be about this thick. They have collected tons of information, and for that, whatever happens with this, I commend their effort and the energy and forethought that they've put into this whole thing. They don't, and they're not looking for credit if this does work. I think they're genuine in their goal to try to help fix problems here. You might not agree with how they're doing it, but they're trying something, and I give them a lot of credit for that.
Well, and to your point, Seuss, I think that's a great point, because I think a lot of the thought process when you start talking to people today is, I think some people kind of roll their eyes and say, here we go again. Here we're having these same discussions again about districts and why do we got to change things. And I think it's important to note that what's important here is a conversation is being had. And to your point, I credit Roxana for stepping up and for trying something here, because for as many people want to roll their eyes and say, why do we have to change something, as we've just discussed for over an hour, there are things that could be improved. So I think it's important that we're having the conversation. And Mitch, to your point from the very beginning, if people can just go into it and look into it with an open mind and maybe discover what maybe works for them that they didn't know could work for them, or just to maybe you realize that, nope, this is, I've read it and I still don't think it's going to work for us. That's fine too. But I think let's have the thorough discussion and the thought process play out, because I think it's important. So, well, hey, I thank you guys for both jumping in, for having the knowledge. I had read the proposal, but Mitch, you really dug in and talked to people today. And Seuss, you know all the background going back to when this was first being drafted up. So I appreciate the knowledge from both of you. I'm really excited to see, like I said, when the mock-ups come out and kind of see how this moves forward. Whether it goes forward or not, I think it's great conversation.
This episode of View from the West podcast is brought to you by Simulation Sports. In addition to golf simulators and batting cages, Simulation Sports provides golf club repair, custom fittings for driver shafts, and even private lessons for golf, baseball, and softball. Whether you're looking for a fun group activity or want to fine-tune your skills and equipment, Simulation Sports has something for everyone. Visit their facility at 400 South Main Street in Monmouth, Illinois, or go to thesimulationsports.com to start playing today.
At Modern Woodmen of America, service is about more than our members. It's about our community, too. We share values that include personal financial security and helping friends and neighbors in need. We're your partner helping you protect your future, and together we're making an impact here in our local communities. I'm Nate Neighbor. Find me on the Modern Woodmen of America website.
Get to know your local Modern Woodmen representative to plan for your financial future and learn about valuable member benefits. Modern Woodmen of America. Touching lives, securing futures. Securities offered through MWA Financial Services, Inc., a wholly owned subsidiary of Modern Woodmen of America.
The View from the West Player of the Week is brought to you by Breedlove Sporting Goods, Western Illinois' premier sporting goods store for uniforms, apparel, equipment, awards, and online team stores. They offer name brands such as Adidas, Under Armour, and Nike, and are extremely responsive with any inquiries. With a primary focus on the western side of the state of Illinois, Breedlove Sporting Goods is the fastest way to outfit your team. You can check them out on Facebook or at breedlovesports.com.
When it comes to quality, convenient pizza, Godfather's Pizza in Silvis has you covered. Featuring a beautiful dine-in area, delivery, and a carry-out window. Godfather's Pizza is that pizza you grew up with, not a convenience store. You see, at Godfather's Pizza, the dough is made fresh daily. That mozzarella cheese is shredded fresh and never frozen. And those toppings are abundantly piled high each and every time. Locally owned and operated since 2010, Godfathers is a huge supporter of local athletes right here in the Quad Cities. So come on by and check them out at 1211 Avenue of the Cities in Silvis. Order online at godfathers.com and reunite with that same delicious pizza you grew up with.
This is Dan Pearson of Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Our FCA team of staff, board, and volunteers is pleased to support View from the West with Greg and Mitch. Our Northwest Illinois FCA team is 3 teams in 1, serving coaches and athletes in the Three Rivers, Northern Illinois, and Greater Peoria areas, all with schools covered by View from the West. For more information, email me at danpearson@fca.org. FCA, the heart and soul in sports.
Hey there, local high school football fans. This is Sean Considine, a Byron Tiger and Iowa Hawkeye alumni, and now an LPL financial advisor. I'm passionate about high school football because it's the purest form of the game where communities come together. You can find me in my Byron office until I run off to football practice. I'm happy to talk about football or the markets. I'll leave that up to you. I want to wish everyone across Illinois a safe, successful, and memorable high school football season.
Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC.
Hey, this is Brett Bielma, the head coach of the Fighting Illini from Prophetstown, Illinois. You're listening to the View from the West podcast.
Seuss, can we get like 10 more minutes out of you to talk like the actual brackets that we have coming up in 2 weeks?
Boys, let's be honest. It's not going to take 10 minutes, but I got time for you, so we can do what we need to do.
So the reason I want to, pick your brain is not necessarily the matchups between each class and kind of who's going where, but what I really love is your kind of view from 10,000 feet of look at where all the 7-8 or the 7-0 teams are sorted into, and look at where the undefeated teams are here, and how many undefeated matchups do we have left to where one of those teams is going to have to lose a game down the way. I heard your Friday Night Drive podcast, and I'm always just marvel at the amount of like numbers and detailed insight you have. So tell me, let's start with, how does this playoff picture look compared to past seasons, and is this what you expected? How is it playing out?
Well, I think a lot of the interesting factoids that have kind of been coming out of this playoff draw is that, the enrollment numbers and the changes that were made in the off season to the multiplier process, in terms of there are a lot more schools that are multiplied now and have different enrollment numbers than they've had in the past. They're all a lot of schools are skewing to much larger classifications. That the biggest difference that I've noticed in this year's playoff field is there are a whole bunch of schools, especially in the middle classifications, that if I asked you before this season started, if this team makes a playoff, what field are they going to be in? I think almost across the board, you'd be wrong by a class. You'd be a class too high on public schools. There's just like you look at 4A, for example, there are a whole bunch of teams that are in that projected draw right now that have historically been 5A teams for the last 10 to 15 years. It's just, that's the way we're skewing this year. We just have more schools that are, maybe that in the past they've been a 5A, 6A bubble school, and now they're clearly in 5. And that the reason for that is because of those schools that were not multiplied before, they are now, and they're taking those spots in 6, in 7, in 8, and they're pushing that line up because, for years I've had a running conversation with Alan Thorson, the Morris football coach. Are we going to be 4 or 5A? And every year I tell him, it's pretty close, Al. I think you're going to be 4. I think you're going to be 5. And we go back and forth. We're not having that conversation this year. I told him after week 1, Al, don't worry about it. You're 4. Stop worrying about it. That's where you're going to be, and that's where they're going to be come postseason pairings night. So that's something that's been really hard for me because that's the way my brain works. I just look at a team and I'm used to them being in 6A. Wait a minute, nope, 5. It's just like that. I've been doing that rejiggering of where the teams are at all season long. I think I've finally kind of got a handle on it now, but there's still some fascinating bubble watches with teams that I'm just not used to them being bubble watch teams. And of course, my favorite bubble watch that has been developed over the past 3 weeks is the following bubble watch. Between 3 and 4A, there are 2 schools that have exactly the same enrollment. So You have to flip a coin to decide which team goes.
Who are those?
That's how it's broken. Benton in Southern Illinois and South Shore out of the Chicago Public League. So those two schools have exactly the same enrollment. And the even the more fascinating thing about that is it makes it very difficult to project brackets because one school's a northern school and one school's a southern school. So which side are they going to go? And they're clearly southern school, northern school. It's not a debate. So if that school loses the coin flip and goes into 4A, that I had projected in 3A, it changes the whole bracket for both sides if I get that coin flip wrong when I'm projecting. So if that stays that way, that's one of those situations that I've been lobbying my friend at the IHSA. When we have that situation, I think we should flip that coin a week before, so we know.
Yeah.
So we know what is going to happen. Like when we have, because I was on the conference call the last time this happened because I was getting prepared for the playoff show when we were doing it up in Chicago, and that situation evolved between a 1 and a 2A school. So I went in the room where they were having a conference call where they had administrators from both sides of the school, and in the IHSA office, they flipped the coin to decide which class went to which class. So it was 10 or 12 years ago. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it's been a while. But that is the one that I'm watching every week. I check that. That's the first thing I do when I run my 256 list is I go and check to see if 96 and 97 are still Benton and South Shore, because if that's the situation, we're going to have to flip the coin. But going back to my original discussion on this topic, the thing that's been most interesting to me is watching those bubbles with different teams that I'm used to. Another interesting one is between 5 and 6A. Glenwood is a team that's been bouncing back and forth between 5 and 6A. I think they're a very good football team that could maybe make some noise in 6A. If that team slides into 5A, boy, I think they might be the favorite there. I mean, that's how open I think 5A might be. So that's a fascinating bubble watch type of situation. But for me, a general overview of this year, that's been the most interesting thing. Getting used to these teams in different classifications and then watching these new bubbles develop where there are teams that are constantly kind of on these bubbles. Somehow Wilmington hasn't changed. They're still in the same situation that they've always been, riding that fence between 2 and 3A. Everyone else, this whole thing has changed, but Wilmington, same situation. Don't know if they're going to be in 2 or 3A. Every week, it seems like they're right on that fence line.
Yeah. They're always right on that borderline. But to your point, from our area, Sterling, I always remember them playing 5A. They're now sitting in 4A, and Newman, it's no surprise. They've played 2A before, but they were projected to be 1A almost all year long, and now it looks like they're in your 2A bracket, and they're maybe trending more towards 2A, but they're still kind of on that bubble too.
They're still right on the fence. I mean, and some of these things that are coming out, like it didn't happen this week. Actually, it did happen this week. Like I've got a school with 1,000 enrollment in 4A, and I can't remember that ever happening. So the projection brain is exploding when I see that because I'm not used to that happen, but that's the new reality. That's the way we're trending. That's the way it's going to, and I think that's the way it's going to continue to be.
Yeah. Mitch, what do you got for Seuss looking at brackets here?
No, I was going to ask about Wilmington because I think that, we're going to have some coverage there in 2A North. And certainly if you throw Wilmington in there, they become most likely, if not the top seed, the top dog. And if they fall into 3A, we have teams in 3A North. So Wilmington is kind of that team that we might see either way, but just from a seeding perspective, because I think we have some teams like a Farmington in 2A that I think could really do well. But if you throw Wilmington in there, that becomes a new wrinkle that they would have to face at some point, maybe the quarters or maybe the semis. So no, it's coming into focus a little bit. We have some teams that we follow that are sitting at 3 wins right now that we project that will get to 5 and get in. There's some teams that at 4 that I don't think they'll get their 5th win until week 9. So as always, it'll be late Friday night that we finally know where or who gets in, and I imagine that is both exciting and tiring for you, Seuss.
Well, when you look at 2A North, which you just mentioned there a little bit, that's one of the more fascinating brackets to kind of look at from a kind of looking out and projecting it. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, we talk about there's not that many 9-0 teams that are going to be in the general playoffs overall, and that's true. But that is not the case in 2A, and depending on the way that geographic split goes, Westville's right on the bubble between the North and the South bracket, and depending on where they fall, I mean, you could have as many as 6 undefeated teams on the north side of that bracket, and then we're talking about another team. You're mentioning Wilmington. Wilmington has a loss because they lost to Morris in week 1.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you get those 6 undefeated teams in there, and Wilmington's point situation is good, but it's not great, I'm not kidding you here. If Westville ends up going to the North, there's a distinct possibility that an 8-1 Wilmington team could be on the road in the first round in 2A North. And then think about that on top of it. That would probably mean that they were in the 8-9 game. So the 1 seed in 2A is going to have to go to Wilmington in the second round. The 1 seed is going to have to do that. So, and
I mean, hold up a 1 through 32 sign for the rest of my life.
I mean, that's what we're kind of looking at right here is the possibilities. And Westville's kind of the pivot there. If they somehow end up in that North bracket and they're very close to that line, you have to start thinking about it from the machinations of it. Okay, you got 6 undefeated teams. The 8-1 teams. There's a couple. If Sterling Newman ends up in 2, they're going to have more points than Wilmington does. So then you start getting down to the 8-9 round. Is there one more team in there that maybe has more points than Wilmington does? I don't know. Maybe. If they do, Wilmington falls to the bottom half of that bracket because of that 1 loss to Morris in the opening week of the season. So imagine that. Imagine looking at the bracket and saying to yourself, oh my God, it's bad enough I'm in the 8-9 game. I got to play Wilmington? Are you kidding me? Like, I mean, that's and then as the top seed, you're going, okay, the 8-9 game is usually a game that you feel like as a top seed, you should be able to manage pretty well, whether you're on the road or, I mean, come on. I mean, 2A North looks like it could be an absolute gauntlet. It's just really funny, like how this is going. I mean, we have 35 undefeated teams in the state right now, statewide. Some of them are going to lose a game over the course of the rest of the season. 3 of them have to lose this week. There are 3 games between undefeated teams. That list will probably be in the low 20s when we get to week 9. But through my projections, I mean, 14 of those teams are in 1 and 2A. So think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
Just do the math.
One of those.
Yep.
Yeah, one of those 2A North teams would be Rock Ridge, who plays undefeated 3A Monmouth Roseville. So they could be sitting at 8-1 and be in a really bad situation and be a really, really good team. So that's a mess.
Yeah, and I mean, it depended on the way these things break. I mean, 6A could have no undefeated teams in the entire bracket, none. And then I mean, so it's just like this is what I always talk about with people that don't fully understand the system. All the classes affect the other classes. Like it's just the way that this is put together. It's part of what I think is beautiful about the system. To be honest with you, that as a 7A team, you have to be interested in what's happening in 2A. Like, I love that. I know some people don't, but I know that to me, I mean, I got the big board over my shoulder here. I mean, every one of those games is going to have, I mean, that back there has magnets for every team that's playing in week 9 and who they're playing. Every one of those games has some sort of impact on how that field is going to be put together. And I love that personally. I think it's great.
Yeah. Over the last few weeks, have there been results that, shocked you, that caught your attention, that said, I never had this penciled in, that have kind of shifted your boards or shifted your brackets?
A little bit last week, there were a couple of games that kind of threw me for a loop. The one thing that I'm really careful in watching right now, and Mitch mentioned them a little bit there earlier, you've got these teams right now that are sitting there with 3 and 4 losses at this stage of the season, and you're looking at their schedule and you're saying, that's a game that they got to have. And I felt like, over the last couple of weeks, there have been some of those games where I feel like it's a game that they got to have. It's a game that I think that they should win. and then they didn't. And then that's when you start getting into that conversation of, why do I have so many 4 and 5 teams in the field right now? I have 8. That's what I have the projection at right now. The reason for that is because when those results start coming in, when teams fail to get those games that they need to win, and then they have one more game on their schedule, say, for example, against a 6-1, that now becomes a must win instead of you'd sure like to have it win, but you're probably not going to get it. That's when teams start falling off the board that 2 weeks ago, I may have had them projected in. Now, because of that loss in a game that I thought that they probably needed and should have had, they didn't get it. Then they fall off, and the thing that replaces those types of teams is a 4 and 5. So as the season goes along, you have more of those results. You start that 4 and 5 list starts to go up. That changes in week 9, because then you start to look at, okay, these are the teams in the state that are 4 and 4 right now. So you get a clear definition of what they have to have and who they have to beat. Will a 4 and 4 beat a 7 and 1 in week 9? Because by all logic, they shouldn't. Every year it happens. All right.
Yep.
Will a 4 and 4 lose to a 2 and 6? Probably. I mean, that is a team that before the week starts, you have going in. But when they lose that game to a team that just goes out and says, let's go, we got nothing to lose, and they let it loose and throw everything in the kitchen sink at this team. And sometimes it breaks your way. That's the way it goes. But that's the list that I'm fascinated with in week 9. What happens in that? And I've talked about this a little bit in the past. 2 years ago, we had a whole bunch of those 2 and 6s, 3 and 5s knocking people out. All right.
Yeah.
And then we didn't have a lot of upstarts, 4 and 4s beating teams with better records. Last year was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And I don't know if we'll ever have this happen again. There was not a single game in the state between 2 4 and 4 teams in week 9. Nowhere.
I do remember that. Yeah.
Nowhere.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's almost a mathematical impossibility to have that happen, but yet it did. So we had none of those. And then what we had is we had a bunch of 4 and 4 teams rising up and picking off 6 and 2s. So they were stealing bids, taking bids off the board that I didn't think they were going to get. And that squeezed that 4 and 5 group down to one team at the end of the day. The previous year, we had the other way. We had a bunch of 2 and 6s, 3 and 5s, snapping up and taking those 4 and 4s off the board, kicking them out. We didn't have any 4 and 4s rise up and beat 6 and 2s. So then that list of 4 and 5s expanded, and we ended up with 6, which is the highest we've ever had, including a state champion. So that was, and that's where we get into the whole thing of how are we going to get these 4 and 5s in the field? What happens? That's when you get the real zero. And that is the most fascinating thing about week 9. Like I said, I've got the board behind me. I've got all those games up there. I'm watching them as best I can. I've got 17 different screens going on up here trying to keep track of them all and, get those results, because that's what shapes the field. That's what those 4 and 5s are holding their breath for, that have played good schedules and can probably be dangerous in the playoffs if they get the chance. They're holding their breath and hoping for a little help. They got it 2 years ago. They did not get it last year.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mitch.
I was going to say, is there a Nazareth Academy this year, a 5 and 4 team that could make a run?
It's interesting. When you look at who I have in now, and of those teams that are going to potentially get in at 4 and 5, the most interesting ones of them are always going to be, Catholic League teams that play these power pack schedules. But the interesting thing about that is there's only one of them that I think is actually going to fill that bill, and that's Marist. And the problem for Marist would be if they ended up getting into the field as a 4 and 5 team, they were going to be the 32 seed in 8A. Well, Mount Carmel's the 1 seed. So, or Lincoln Way East is the 1 seed. So, that's one of the interesting dynamics about another underlying interesting dynamic about all these situations. And I talked about this a little bit before. The Chicago Public League is not going to have a single team that goes undefeated this year. They all have at least one loss at this point in the season. So we're not going to have a Chicago Public League team taking up a 1 or a 2 seed line in one of these brackets that frankly probably doesn't deserve it. So that's another dynamic that would hurt a potential 4 and 5 team, is they won't get a first round opponent like from the Chicago Public League that would allow them to get their feet wet in the playoffs, win by a comfortable margin, move into the second round against the 8-9 winner, maybe make that little bit of a run there. I mean, Nazareth was an isolated circumstance. I mean, it was surprising that with their talent, they ended up 4 and 5, but they did. And I knew it as soon as they got in. It was going to be a problem for everybody in that bracket. I mean, they ended up beating Cary Grove in the first round in probably one of the most violently even 2 versus 15 games in the history of the IHSA playoffs. But that's what had happened. But yeah, I don't really see one of those out of the group of teams that I currently have projected to get in at 4 and 5. There are a couple of teams that maybe are at 5 and 4 that I think could maybe be some dark horses to maybe make some noise, but that all depends on the bracket too. You know how that goes. You could end up getting a terrible first round draw as one of those dark horses too.
Yeah. Refresh my memory, or maybe let the people listening know, come week 9, what's kind of the playoff points that somebody needs to have to be a 4 and 5 team that gets in? Or is that's kind of in flex until the day
I think 50 and above will get you in. 47 and above gets you in the conversation. I think that's really kind of where it's at. That's roughly where it goes. I can look at somebody's schedule and tell you, just on paper and say, that's not going to be good enough. Like, just because, I mean, that really what it comes down to is you've got to play, especially if you're in an 8-team conference, you got to play somebody in the non-conference to get in that, at least one really good team and probably one at the average team to get your points total to that. If you're in an 8-team conference, 6-team conference, you need your crossover games to be the good ones and not the bad ones. I mean, to get you into that conversation, because it's not easy to get to 50 points. It's not easy to do that.
Well, I'm trying to remember, Mitch, you may help me out. The only 4 and 5 team I remember from our area was Sterling that's gotten in recent years. I don't think we've had 4 and 5s other than that. Maybe one other time.
No, I don't. Yeah, Sterling's the only one that rings a bell.
Yeah. Yep. So, yeah, we don't see it very often, but I know our teams, our coaches are always watching it to see, hey, we're 4 and 5. Do we have a shot at it come that late Friday night into Saturday morning? So I'm just curious to get that kind of point total.
I've only got one team right now projected to finish at 4 and 5 with more than 50 points. That's Sycamore. So that tells you how short that list is. I mean, the list drops off pretty quickly. There are a couple of teams, regardless of record, at 50, and then there are a couple of teams at 49. And we're talking about the teams that have compiled top 15 totals, regardless of record in the state. Like, when you're talking about 50 points, because I mean, the most playoff points projected out of anyone that is in the playoff mix is 56. So that gives you an idea. I mean, the fewest, you can go all the way down to less than 20, believe it or not. So, which is one of my favorite side stories of the year. But I'm fascinated with how the Aurora Central Catholic football schedule was put together. I'll just put it that way. So,
all right,
you go take a peek at it. You'll see what I'm talking about immediately.
All right, there you go. To our listeners as well, go take a peek at that. There you go.
Yeah. So, but that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. One more question from me. Looking at last year's state championship Friday and into Saturday, we were there. We had conversations. There were plenty of conversations had across the state about the system, and maybe it was broken or there were things that were not working based on the results we saw. We know the outcry that was. We know the results that followed. So now, looking at this projected playoff field, now that we're getting kind of a view of what it's going to look like, do you feel like it worked? And we'll know more when the games are played on the field. Do you feel like these adjustments by the IHSA with the private and the public schools is working based on projections so far?
I think the likelihood of us having, I can't think of a more politically correct term than this, but a bloodbath of state final games like we had last year, where almost none of them were competitive across the board. I don't think we're going to have that this year. I really don't. I think there might be a few classes that maybe get away from us a little bit. And I honestly think that some of that might have to do with the north-south geographic break, which has always kind of been a problem in some respects, where I don't necessarily think that it is always producing the best representatives in the state final in some of the smallest classes. I think that when we see some semifinal games that are much more competitive than we're seeing in the finals, I think that speaks to that. But I think if I were to say right now, based on the most recent projection that I did, the two teams that I think are most likely to reach the state finals, and I do this in my head pretty much every week based on the way that the bracket looks. Do I think we're going to have more competitive state final games with the way that these brackets are shaped? Yeah, I do. I could be proven wrong on that. But and I think there are also some other dynamics to it. There have been a couple of those dynamic programs that are simply not having as good of years as they've had in the past. I mean, we're going to have a few teams that made state championship games last year probably not make the playoff field. So, I mean, in fact, I know we're going to have at least one state champion in the playoff field. And then another one that was a runner-up is not going to make the playoff field. I don't think. They do have one out, but I don't think it's likely for them. So, so, like I said, it's just it's been a different year. But like when I look at 5A on paper, I'm like, tell me who's going to win 5A.
Yeah.
Like, and I think I could sit here and make a case for 6 to 8 teams. And in the past, I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah, that's great. Yep.
And I think that's good. I think that's a good thing. So, and I think some of these corrections with the multipliers, they needed to happen. They had to happen. And I'm hoping, to be honest with you, and I mean, I don't mean to dismiss anyone else in 6A. I'm hoping the geography corrects and puts Nazareth on the other side of East St. Louis, because I don't want those teams to meet before the state final. I want them to play each other if that is the situation. So, like I said, I don't mean to discount any other team in 6A. I'm just saying, ideally for me, I would like to see Nazareth and East St. Louis play at Hancock Stadium.
Yeah, for sure. Mitch, you got anything else for Souce?
I just looked at the Aurora Central Catholic schedule, and I'm looking at it now. That is the most egregious thing I've ever seen. That is hilarious.
I just don't know how. I don't know how they found out that much about Wisconsin football. That's the one thing that
okay, Greg. Let me set the scene for Greg here.
Yeah.
So Aurora Central Catholic is sitting at 6-1. Okay.
Yep.
Their one loss is to a 5-2 Alton team, Alton Marquette. That is the only team they've played with a winning record. The records that they've played is 1-6, 1-6, 2-5, 0-6, 2-6, 2-6. Their last 2 games are 1-7 and 1-6. They are in the midst right now of 4 consecutive weeks of playing Wisconsin schools who are all very bad. And that is, again, hilarious and unbelievable that they pulled that off.
So they play independent, clearly.
Yes.
Yeah. And they've scouted Wisconsin well, apparently. I mean, advantageously.
I don't even know if I honestly, I know quite a bit about them just because of crossover games with the state. I don't even know if I could have done that good of a job if that was my intent, to go in there and say, I want games I can win. Like, if you look into that a little bit deeper, like the last 4 games of their season are, I believe there are about 370 football playing schools in Illinois. All 4 of those schools are ranked 340 and below.
Yeah.
So so that's what we're talking about. So it's one of those things where, like, this is where I get into the whole situation of I wish that we seeded by the wins in those games rather than the overall total playoff points. The game that you get the points of the teams that you beat. Like, you don't get the points of the teams that you played. That's what we can let them in this way, but I wish that was the way we seeded them. You only
Okay.
get credit,
Yeah.
playoff point credit for the teams that you beat, because in that case, since their only losses to a team with a winning record, they wouldn't even get credit for that. So they would be seated very
Yeah.
low, despite the fact their record was very good because they didn't beat anyone. So, like I said, everyone always asks me the question: if you were in control of it, what would you do? That would be the first switch that I would make. You seed your playoff point seeding is based on the teams you beat, not just all the teams on your schedule.
Well, I know that Kyle Kampmeyer from NUICfootball.com would want to be in on that conversation because he would be in lockstep with you. He would completely agree with the seeding process. So, Mitch, what do you say we invite Kyle in and we talk for another 3 hours?
I think this is a perfect agenda item for when we're all in Bloomington in a matter of a couple weeks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Seuss, I look forward to seeing you in the press box again. Mitch and I will be there. Kyle, like I said, from NUIC Football will be there. And a few other, Matt Surdich, a buddy of ours, will be there as well. So I think Mitch, as last check, Logan Swan from the WIVC coverage area will be there with us. So we'll have our cast of characters there again.
Whether we have a team or not, we'll be there and covering.
Yep.
We're going to come in under 2 hours here, aren't we, boys?
We are going to coast
Pretty
in
good.
right under 2 hours.
Yeah.
How about that?
There we go.
So, well, hey, Steve Soucie from Friday Night Drive. I encourage anyone who doesn't, go out, subscribe to them, follow along, catch up on all the bracket, the bracketology that goes throughout the season. And certainly now the next couple weeks, it's really going to pick up. So, Seuss, you're live with Matt Rodewald every Friday night, correct? For about 2 hours, about this same amount of time that we're going today.
Well, we do that. We do that from 9:30 to 11 on Friday nights, and then I stay afterwards and break down game results and such. Week 9, by the way, we stay up all night. So we go 9:30 to 4 whenever. So and I know a lot of people say that they're up with us really late. I said, well, how late? I can tell by the last thing that they told me they heard. They said, because I outlast just about everybody on that night because I'm foolishly trying to reproject. Brackets usually take me about 8 to 10 hours to do on an average weekend for all 8 classes, and doing it the way that I do it. I foolishly try to do it all that Friday night after those Friday results are in. So I usually stay up till about 4 o'clock in the morning with a few specific crazies that stay up with me the entire time. So that is what I do. That is what I've been doing for the last couple of years. And then I simply try to sleepwalk my way through the next day. And unfortunately, the playoff pairing show has made the unfortunate decision to put me on camera again this year. So I don't know how I'm going to manage this week, this year, but you might take note of me taking a nap on the TV studio floor when I'm waiting for the TV contracts to come up on Saturday night. But we're going to do it. We're going to see what we can do. Looking forward to that. It's my Christmas. I'm not going to lie. It's my favorite weekend of the year.
Yeah. No, I remember when you introduced that kind of up all night with Soucie bracketology in week 9 a few years ago. I was up pretty late with you. The viewers were dwindling. I was still in on it for quite a while.
Yep, it's a good time, and there are a lot of people out there that I've made internet friendships with that come in there and help me find scores and stuff like that. It's been an amazing community that's kind of developed over there, and it's great because we all have a great common interest and a love for high school football in Illinois, and it's nice to have an area where people can express their thoughts and have a good time. And I'm blessed to have the forum that I do. I really feel fortunate to have done that. A lot of people try to credit me and tell me all this work that I'm doing. I wouldn't do any of it if I didn't love it as much as I do. So. I'm just happy that I get the chance to do the things that I get to do. And I'm not blowing smoke up you. I'm glad I get to do stuff like this with guys like you. I mean, that enjoy and appreciate it, as much as I do. Cause I mean, I wouldn't agree to do this if I didn't already know that you guys share a great passion for this too.
Hey, I got to give a shout out to Weather on the Go. I know you're familiar with him on social media.
Yeah.
Last week during our live show, he was commenting scores from like Washington, Sacred Heart Griffin, whatever. And then all of a sudden he said, "Oh, sorry, I meant to send these to Souce, but you can have them anyway." So he was multitasking for both of our shows. So we really appreciate him. Shout out to Weather on the Go, because he's contributing all the time. So, Mitch, we'll be back in Friday night when we know a few more results here with only 1 week left, and the bracket talk is really picking up. So, Souce, thanks for jumping on. We're cutting it short before 2 hours. So, we did good here, but I really appreciate your insight and your expertise on all this stuff. And hopefully people leave a little more informed on the proposal and then have a little bit of excitement of the bracket talk as well. So, have fun the rest of the season. We look forward to seeing you in Bloomington Normal on that Friday afternoon.
Absolutely. Anytime, fellas. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks to everyone who listens, who follows along. Thanks for listening to this bonus episode. Hope you enjoyed. The next time you hear us, we'll be back live Friday night for the Instant Reacts podcast at 10:15. We'll talk to you then. That'll do it for this week's episode of View from the West. Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to go out to Apple Podcasts or Podbean and subscribe so you can follow along, and downloads will come automatically every week. You can follow along on Twitter at ViewFromWestPod. You can also email me if you're interested in being a sponsor, viewfromwestpod@gmail.com. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.